The way we start our mornings is far more powerful than most people realize. The first few moments after waking are not just routine. They're neurological leverage points. In neuroscience, we call this the transition state, that short window when your brain moves from deep rest into wakefulness. During this time, your mind is in a highly malleable or neuroplastic state. It's listening, it's open. It's shaping the narrative that will guide your entire day. What you say to yourself in that window quite literally wires your brain for what you're about to experience. Most of us wake up and immediately hand control over to kiosks. Our phones, notifications, worries, yesterday's unfinished business. We start reacting before we even get the chance to direct our mind. But if instead you begin by saying 5 intentional statements, words that affirm who you are and how you want to move through the world, you begin to shift from reaction to creation. You take authorship of your mental state. Let me put this simply, the brain follows language. The words you speak, even silently to yourself, act as internal commands. They shape perception, focus, and emotional tone. When you say something like, I'm ready for today, or I can handle anything that comes my way, you're not just offering yourself comfort. You're triggering specific neural circuits related to confidence, clarity, and emotional regulation. Your nervous system begins to align with that message. This isn't just motivational talk, it's biology. The brain's limbic system, which governs emotion, and the prefrontal cortex, which controls decision-making, communicate constantly. When your self-talk is negative, I'm tired, I'm not good enough, today's going to be hard, you prime those systems for stress. Cortisol levels rise, your focus narrows, and you literally begin scanning the world for proof that your thoughts are true. But when your self-talk is intentional, empowering, and repeated, you begin training the opposite response, activating the networks that support calmness, alertness, and motivation. It's no different from how professional athletes mentally rehearse success before stepping into the arena. Visualization, affirmation, repetition. These aren't mystical techniques. They're tools for guiding the brain's plasticity in a deliberate direction. The same principle applies when you start your morning with words that anchor your attention in strength and possibility. Now, some people hear this and think, that sounds too simple. How could saying a few sentences change my life? The truth is, it's not about the sentences themselves. It's about what they represent. Every morning, you're setting a reference point for how you interpret the world. You're building a mental filter. And your brain is a pattern detecting machine. It seeks coherence. If you tell it you're grounded, focused, and capable, it starts finding reasons to confirm that. Over time, that belief becomes your default mode. Your neural baseline. There's a psychological concept called self-directed neuroplasticity. It means you can consciously reshape your brain's wiring through repeated focus and thought. Morning affirmations are one of the most accessible ways to do that. You're not passively waiting to feel better. You're engaging the circuits that produce that feeling. You're reminding your brain, this is who I am, until it becomes true through consistent experience. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You could start with something as simple as, I am present, I am focused. I am becoming stronger every day. The key is that you believe the possibility, even if you're not there yet. The brain doesn't require absolute certainty. It requires repetition. With an repetition, your nervous system stops questioning and starts embodying. It's important to remember, though, that this isn't about toxic positivity. It's not about denying difficulty or pretending everything's perfect. It's about directing your mental energy where it serves you most. Life will always present challenges, but the state you meet them in determines whether they break you or build you. Morning self-talk is how you choose that state before the world chooses it for you. Think of it this way: if you don't program your mind each morning, someone else will. Social media will, news will, other people's opinions will. You'll spend the day reacting instead of creating. But if, in those first few quiet moments, you take control, even for just 60 seconds, you anchor yourself in awareness and intention. You tell your brain, I'm in charge here. Over time, this becomes a kind of psychological momentum. You start noticing opportunities instead of problem solutions, instead of stressors. Your emotional baseline shifts. You begin to experience less as something that happens to you and more as something you actively shape. That's the real power of morning self-talk. It's not about tricking yourself into false confidence. It's about training your brain to serve your highest potential rather than your fears or your past conditioning. So when you wake up tomorrow, before you reach for your phone, before you check the world, take a breath and say something intentional. 5 sentences that align with who you want to become. It might feel small, but you'll be amazed at how quickly the brain begins to listen. Because ultimately, the words you speak each morning aren't just sounds. They're instructions. And your life will inevitably follow their lead. One of the most misunderstood ideas in psychology and personal development is the concept of identity. People often focus on habits, motivation, or goals, but very few realize that who you believe you are quietly governs everything you do. Every behavior you repeat, every decision you make is filtered through your sense of identity. And here's the fascinating thing: identity isn't fixed. It's built, shaped, and rewritten every day, especially through the language you use with yourself. When you wake up and affirm certain truths, not about what you want, but about who you are, you begin to align your nervous system, your attention, and your behavior with that identity. Neuroscience shows us that the brain's predictive machinery is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. It wants coherence between what you say and what you do. So when you start saying, I am disciplined and now I'm focused, I am calm, even before you fully believe it, your brain begins working to make those statements true. It adjusts perception and motivation to match the internal narrative. That's how self-directed change happens, not through willpower alone, but through identity alignment. The philosopher William James once said, act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. He wasn't just speaking poetically, he was describing a psychological principle. When you act as if, your brain starts to internalize that pattern. This is why affirmations rooted in identity are more powerful than those rooted in outcome. When you say, I will be successful, your brain treats it as a distant possibility. But when you say, I am the kind of person who creates success, you bring it into the present moment. You make it real now. The difference is subtle linguistically, but enormous neurologically. This is what I mean when I say speak, you must speak who you want to become. Your brain listens to your words as instructions. Over time, they shape the neural pathways that guide behavior. Think of your affirmations as internal programming. You can't install a new operating system by repeating random commands. It has to be intentional, precise, and consistent. If you want to live with discipline, speak discipline. If you want to embody calmness, speak calmness. If you want to be courageous, speak courage, even when you feel afraid. Especially when you feel afraid, there's a deep, deep psychological truth behind this. The stories we tell ourselves are not descriptions. They're blueprints. Every belief about yourself is a lens that filters reality. If you say, I'm not confident, your brain unconsciously finds evidence to confirm that belief. But if you say, I'm learning to express myself with confidence, you open a new mental channel, a possibility for growth. The shift from I'm not to I'm becoming might seem small, but it changes everything about how your brain encodes experience. You move from a fixed to a flexible mindset. And that's where transformation begins. The neuroscientific mechanism behind this involves something called the default mode network. The system of the brain that's active when you're thinking about yourself, your past, your future. It's the seat of self-reflection and narrative identity. When you engage in intentional self-talk, especially in the morning when the brain is most plastic, you're literally reshaping this network. You're changing how your brain defines you, and because your identity determines how you interpret stress, how you pursue goals, and how you recover from setbacks, this kind of rewiring creates profound real-world changes. Philosophically, this idea isn't new. Ancient Stoics spoke about the importance of internal dialogue, about telling yourself who you choose to be before the day begins. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journals not to record his life, but to direct his mind. He would remind himself each morning, you are in control of your thoughts. That practice, the conscious repetition of identity-based truths, is exactly what modern neuroscience now validates as self directed neuroplasticity. So when you wake up, it's not enough to just say, I will do better today. You need to speak as the person you intend to be. The brain doesn't respond to vague intentions. It responds to clear identity cues. Say, I am someone who keeps promises to myself. So I am someone who shows up even when it's uncomfortable. Say, I am the kind of person who leads with clarity and calm. Each time you repeat those words, you reinforce neural patterns that make that identity easier to access the next time you need it. And over time, something incredible happens. You stop needing to remind yourself. The language becomes belief, and the belief becomes behavior. You begin acting in alignment with your words because the brain craves consistency between thought and action. You start living as that person, not pretending to be, but becoming. The most powerful transformation doesn't come from chasing external change. It comes from internal congruence. When what you say, think, and do are aligned, there's a kind of peace that replaces the daily struggle for motivation. You no longer have to convince yourself to act. You simply follow the rhythm of who you already believe you are. That's the essence of identity-based living. It's not about effort, it's about alignment. So tomorrow morning, when you look in the mirror, don't just tell yourself what you want. Tell yourself who you are. Speak it with conviction, not because you're there yet, but because your brain needs to hear it in order to become it. That's how transformation truly begins. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Consistency is the real bridge between who you are and who you want to become. It's not the single moment of inspiration that changes your life. It's what you do with that inspiration every morning after it fades. The truth is, transformation is less about intensity and more about repetition. You don't rewire your brain by doing something once. You rewire by doing it until it becomes who you are. In neuroscience, we often talk about synaptic reinforcement, the idea that neurons that fire together wire together. Every time you repeat a behavior or a thought, those neural pathways become stronger, faster, more automatic. When you speak your morning affirmations, when you say those 5 things to yourself, you're not just saying words, you're reinforcing a pattern. And over time, those patterns become traits. That's how identity turns into reality. But most people underestimate the power of small, consistent action because it doesn't feel dramatic enough. We want instant proof that something's working, a rutivation, a big breakthrough, a visible result. Yet the brain doesn't work that way. It learns through gradual calibration. Every repetition tells your nervous system this matters. Every time you return to your morning practice, you're telling your brain, this is who I am. That steady signal eventually drowns out the old noise. The self-doubt, the hesitation, the stories that used to define you. Consistency also does something deeper than just create habits. When you builds trust within yourself. Each morning, even on the days you don't feel like it, you're proving to your brain that your words have weight. You're teaching yourself that your internal dialogue isn't empty motivation. It's a promise kept. Over time, that reliability becomes the foundation of confidence. You stop needing to hype yourself up because you've built evidence that you can depend on your own voice. Psychologically, this is tied to what's known as cognitive congruence, the desire for alignment between belief and behavior. When you consistently act in accordance with your affirmations, your brain adjusts your self-image to match. If you say every morning, I am disciplined, and you follow through, even in small ways, that discipline becomes integrated into your sense of self. It stops being something you do, it becomes something you are. Now, the challenge is that consistency isn't exciting. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It doesn't always feel like progress, but that's exactly where the transformation happens. Think about physical training. You don't get stronger from one workout. You get stronger from thousands of repetitions that your muscles adapt to over time. The brain operates the same way. Neural networks adapt to whatever you repeatedly expose them to. The more consistent your morning practice, the more automatic your mental state becomes. You start to default to clarity, confidence, and control. And here's something interesting. Once your brain begins to associate your morning affirmations with a stable state of mind, it starts predicting that state automatically. You wake up and your nervous system remembers this is how we begin the day. That's when the shift becomes self-sustaining. You've trained your physiology to follow your psychology. Philosophically, this is a lesson in discipline, not in the harsh, rigid sense of forcing yourself, but in the deeper sense of devotion to growth. Consistency is an act of respect toward your future self. It's how you align your present actions with the person you intend to become. When you do this, you stop living reactively. You stop needing external motivation or validation. You realize that transformation isn't an event. It's a practice. But it's important to acknowledge that there will be mornings when you don't feel inspired. Days when the affirmations sound mechanical, when your mind resists, when life pulls you off track. That's part of the process. The goal isn't perfection, it's return. Every time you return to your practice, no matter how imperfectly, you reclaim authority over your mind. You remind your brain, I'm still in charge. And that act of returning again and again is what ultimately rewires your identity. Over weeks and months, the compound effect of those moments becomes undeniable. You start noticing subtle changes, your reactions soften, your focus sharpens, your energy stabilizes. You begin to move through the day with underlying calmness, a quiet certainty. That's not luck or coincidence. That's the cumulative impact of consistent neural conditioning. Eventually, this daily alignment begins to ripple outward. The way you talk changes. The way you treat people changes. The way you handle adversity changes. You stop being a passenger in your own life and start steering it. Not by force, but by repetition. You've trained your mind to serve your goals, not sabotage them. That's what it means to live intentionally, not to wait for motivation, but to create it. Not to rely on mood, but to rely on structure, to realize that transformation is not about one powerful moment. It's about 1,000 quiet ones that no one sees, that only you experience, and that over time make you unrecognizable to your former self. So when you say those 5 things each morning, don't worry about how you feel in that instant. Focus on showing up, because every time you do, you're stacking evidence for your future. You're building neural strength, emotional stability, and self-trust at a time. And one day, without even noticing the shift, you'll wake up and realize that the words you've been speaking are no longer just affirmations. They're reflections of who you've become.